Opening prayers. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop, or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds, and may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. The Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear it one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Master Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan is absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokitesvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no eye element, and so on up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell on the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell on the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised as spoken by the Bhagavan. Praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son. All creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dhamma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. You whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapatsanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. By the virtue of offering to you assembly of Buddhas visualized before me, this mandala built on a base resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon. May all sentient beings share in its good effects. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds. For I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dhammakama wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dhamma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Neyatayami.
Thank you very much. Last week, we left off at a point where, having generated the 2 bodhicittas, as Geshe Jumpa Tekchok explained, and I quote, "Bodhisattvas are to train in the 6 perfections and the 4 means of gathering disciples, guarding them firmly without degenerating. The instructions on how to train in the 6 perfections which ripen one's own continuum and the 4 gatherings which ripen the continuums of others." And he continues, "Through a union of mindfulness, alertness, and enthusiasm, the trainings are to be maintained, as Lama Tsongkhapa says in his Foundation of All Excellence. Quote, with mindfulness, alertness, and enthusiasm, I will be conscientious with my 3 doors of body, speech, and mind, and through that I shall engage in the training of the Bodhisattva's morality without fault." So for this person who has generated both conventional and ultimate bodhicitta, the yoga of conscientiousness is crucial to our intended aims. And I think this becomes clear again if we recollect Tsongkhapa's 5 aspects of conscientiousness, which I referred to last week. Firstly, correction of past faults in accordance with the Dharma, an earnest intention to do likewise in the future, and doing so without forgetfulness in the present. So I actually slipped over that one last week, so I'm just making sure we've got the set of 5. The 4th, a tightening of the mind, thinking how wonderful it would be if I could behave and abide in ways that thoughts do not arise. And 5thly, in dependence on that, abiding and behaving accordingly. So conscientiousness is therefore the central topic of the 4th chapter, coming as it does after we've committed to training in the 2 bodhicittas. But of course, we want this training to go well. Otherwise, why have we taken or wish to take the vows of bodhicitta themselves? So the verses immediately following the opening verse, which we discussed last week, lay out the consequences of polluting, corrupting, spoiling, and even spurning the 2 bodhicittas or either of the 2 bodhicittas, together with the practices that are required to fulfill each. But I'm sure that we're still reeling from the shock and the passing into parinirvana of our most precious Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, an event that, despite our supposed meditational realizations regarding death and impermanence, we were somehow unprepared for. So I thought to begin this session in my own awkward but nonetheless sincere way, to turn or attempt to turn the impact of what has happened towards appreciating even more deeply the purpose of our studying together Shantideva's Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. An opportunity, of course, which has only come about through the blessings of Rinpoche himself. So at a Guru Puja led by Kabje Zopa Rinpoche at Tashita Dharamsala, which I had the fortune of recently attending during His Holiness's teachings in Dharamsala in March, when Rinpoche was involved in leading the recitation of the Lam Rim prayer within the Guru Puja practice, when he got to the exchanging self and others verses, Rinpoche stopped all proceedings and shouted, and I mean shouted here. Rinpoche shouted out, "Everything you need is in the Lojong teachings." Everything. Everything. Then he paused and shouted even louder, "Everything." So this is the pith instruction that Rinpoche gave to us at that time, and it's resounding now. As it says in the Lojong teachings themselves, without a teaching such as mind training, then generally, when things are going well, you do not practice. But when your fortune declines, you develop an interest in practice. His Holiness the Dalai Lama often quotes this passage as a litmus test for whether or not our Dharma practice is robust or even genuine. His Holiness often pushes the point, and with more than a touch of his customary wry humour, by saying, when things are going well, who is a practitioner of Dharma? And when things aren't, who is not? So I remember that when the second big terrible earthquake occurred in 215 in Nepal, one of Rinpoche's students requested Rinpoche for a very special practice to do at that time. And Rinpoche replied very quickly and very directly with just 2 words, Tong Len. So the logic, if you're not going to practice Tong Len, giving and taking meditation, as a means of exchanging self and others now, in a time of travail, then when? So the logic, is embedded right there. For example, we can take on the karma of all those who are in so much pain that they cannot even hear the word Dharma, let alone attempt to practice. Or we can give the conditions for sentient beings to meet with precious perfect teachers, such as Rinpoche, who will guide them very, very soon, all the way to enlightenment. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche says, with Tonlen, by generating compassion, you take others' suffering and the cause of suffering, delusion and karma. Not only that, out of compassion, you even take the conditions, the totally unfavorable conditions, and place them in your heart. They're destroyed there. You can do this with the in-breath, but take it inside your heart. Not this heart, this bumping heart, but the heart where emotions like anger, patience, and loving kindness come from. It's that one, here. You give it to the self-cherishing thought. As I mentioned to you already, the self-cherishing thought is the great demon, your enemy, where all the obstacles to practicing Dharma come from. Rinpoche continues, all the suffering you have experienced in samsara from beginningless time, rebirth from rebirth, all comes from your self-cherishing thought. Take other suffering in your heart and give it to the self-cherishing thought, your enemy, and it is totally destroyed, totally eliminated. When that is eliminated, the real I, real inverted commas, is also destroyed. It is the object of ignorance, the ignorance holding the I as real, while it is not. It has never existed from the beginning, but it appears, and you totally hold this wrong I, this false I. So not only is the self-cherishing thought destroyed, but also this ignorance, the real I that is not there. Then you see it as empty. You see empty as it is empty. End of quote. So in line with this instruction, if we can identify our self-cherishing thought as the source of suffering rather than external events, no matter how apparently momentous, how apparently shocking, even devastating, then we stand some chance of utilizing even times of trauma and immense difficulty as fuel for our practice of love, compassion, and realization of emptiness. This then is a case of turning adversity into its opposite, advantage. In doing this, we turn our mind away from concern for ourselves and to even more intensely towards a concern for others, especially for those who are suffering more than ourselves. And their number is uncountable, and the immensity of their pain immeasurably vast, because their numbers are immeasurably vast. This is a point that Rinpoche so powerfully, continuously emphasized. He used to say, I'm just one person, compared to others, nothing. The suffering of others is so enormous. How could I think of just working for this one person alone? So utilizing Tonlen, therefore, is an incredibly potent way of processing grief. Not just that, but turning our sadness into a catalyst for engaging in our practice with renewed energy and enthusiasm. Because again, if not now, then when? Surely we're not going to wait until times are somehow more favorable again, some mythical again. Mythical because this again is always somewhere other than right now. Putting all this together, we might or can begin to appreciate that Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, by departing in this sudden way, at least to our ordinary limited perspective, is manifesting a very vital, very powerful teaching. We can no longer afford to procrastinate. Could we ever? Oh, our belief in permanence is so strong. Certainly His Holiness the Dalai Lama is most concerned that we respond to the devastating fact that Kabje Zopa Rinpoche has gone in this way. And they're the words of His Holiness. By calling upon us to throw ourselves into real practice as taught, as exemplified by a perfect guru. In his colophon to His Holiness's recently composed A Prayer for the Swift Return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, composed on the 14th of April, 2023, His Holiness says, "It is devastating that Rinpoche has gone in this way. However, the most important thing is that when he is still with us, he made the precious mind of enlightenment the foundation of his practice. If his followers who have been left behind train properly in the Guru's way of life, it is exactly that which will definitely fulfill Rinpoche's wishes. Therefore," His Holiness continues, "keep this in mind. Furthermore, from now on, make requests to the three jewels as well as earnest dedication prayers." So, by studying together this precious text, A Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life, as we're currently doing as part of the basic program established by Lama Yeshe and Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, with the support of many accomplished Geshis and highly qualified Lamas, I feel we're attempting to fulfill His Holiness's advice. This is supported by the fact that His Holiness is clearly alluding to Shantideva's guide when he indicates that Kabje Zopa Rinpoche's entire purpose and method, his guru way, his way as a guru, in other words, was none other than to make the precious mind of enlightenment the foundation of his practice. So this is entirely the instruction that we're receiving from Shantideva as well. So this then is His Holiness's heartfelt tribute and testimony to Rinpoche. So our own seeking to do likewise takes us to the core of His Holiness's instruction, especially at this painful moment when we're reeling in shock from the great loss that has befallen not just us, but the entire world. Indeed, as His Holiness says, seeking to emulate our precious holy Guru in this way is exactly that which will definitely fulfill Rinpoche's wishes, because it is none other than the way of the Bodhisattva. So this should remove all doubts as to how it is best to immediately take our next step. So let's make, just in a few moments, some powerful prayers from the very depths of our hearts that will use this brief time together in order to fulfill His Holiness's advice, and in this way also to fulfill Kabje Zopa Rinpoche's holy wishes, and to make strong aspirations that we too can enter and engage without error and with great joy and enthusiasm the Bodhisattva's way of life. So we'll just do this for a few moments. Thank you. So as the Venerable Geshe Doga said before our Guru Puja at Tara Institute the other night for Khabja Zopa Rinpoche's quick return, from their side, the Holy Guru does not need anything to come from us. He or she is already perfectly perfected. But from our side, to ripen our continuum and thereby open ourselves to the transformative rain of blessings of the Holy Guru, we definitely need to beseech the Holy Guru to help us to fulfill our bodhicitta promise, which entails accomplishing all the states and paths to enlightenment, which is to actualize the entire Lam Rim. As Khabja Zopa Rinpoche so poignantly puts it, only while we have this perfect human rebirth with its 8 freedoms and 10 endowments can we create the causes to achieve all ultimate and temporal wishes. Therefore, we must not waste a second of this life. When Shantideva, this is Rinpoche speaking here, when Shantideva tells us to obtain the benefits of this body, he means we must do whatever we can to create the beneficial causes that can lead to another perfect human rebirth and to enlightenment. The most beneficial causes we can create are to train in sublime bodhicitta. If we are able to generate this mind, we can achieve whatever else we wish. Release from all suffering, peerless enlightenment, and even temporal happiness, such as another rebirth in the realm of the happy transmigratory beings. While we work selflessly to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all mother sentient beings without any expectations for our own temporal happiness, this just happens by the way. If we don't create the causes for another perfect human rebirth now, how will it be possible in a future life when we don't have a human form? This is why doing everything we can to develop bodhicitta is vital. And because this life is fragile and we might die at any moment, we must do it now. End of quote. So Rinpoche here is referencing verse 4, chapter 1. This precious human body, qualified with its freedoms and richnesses, is extremely difficult to find again. If I don't obtain the benefits of this body, with this body, how can I hope to attain a precious body again in the future? So surely the Guru, who is not different from the Buddha, has just revealed the great lesson of death and impermanence by temporarily withdrawing his radiant manifestation from the humble limits of our sight. Thus, he has thrown us upon the need to seize the opportunity to practice right now. We also can think of Shantideva's next verse. Just as a flash of lightning on a dark, cloudy night, for an instant brightly illuminates all, likewise in this world through the might of a Buddha, a wholesome thought rarely and briefly appears. So I just want to mention here that I think this process of partial review, because I'm actually dealing with verses we've already dealt with, in inverted commas, in earlier sessions, is valuable because it suggests the various creative ways in which we're to invoke Shantideva's verses to help us navigate in our daily lives. They're not just something we look at when we're studying, in other words. These are actually lessons. They're tools for our immediate use. And they might also be intimations of verses to be included in the exam. I just throw that in there. So anyway, anyhow, the dark, cloudy night is none other than our own mental obscurations, our own heavily deluded mind. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, in relation to this verse, refers to our condition as one of being blinded by the fog of ignorance. But somehow, a guru has manifested and imparted their perfect instructions, which has engendered within us, like a flash of lightning, an instance of a wholesome, meritorious thought. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche develops this image in the verse. On a completely dark, moonless night, when there is a sudden flash of lightning, we see objects such as trees and the road with incredible clarity, but only for the briefest second. We are in the darkness. The street or road here refers to samsara. And when we see the way to generate merit through the brief flash of Dharma, we are shown the way. For the merest moment, we have some direction, and then it becomes completely dark again. Rinpoche continues, Shantideva uses the metaphor of lightning to show the rarity of this opportunity to meet the holy teachings that we currently have. From beginner's time until now, we have lived countless lives blinded by the fog of ignorance, without the light of Dharma, not having met the teachings of the Buddha, or having met them, not having practiced them. Therefore, it has rarely happened that we have created the causes for an existence such as the one we have now. Now, miraculously, we are in the brief light of a perfect human rebirth, where we have met the Dharma and have clearly been shown the difference between virtue and non-virtue. The difference between and the causes of suffering and happiness. If we don't do something now, says Rinpoche, while we have such a chance, if we don't try to create positive actions with all our energy, then this precious period will end, just as the light from a lightning flash will end, and we will be in darkness again. So clearly, Shantideva's powerful instruction is also a caution. Certainly, we require to obtain a precious human rebirth to maximize our development of bodhicitta in the future, to cause it to flourish. And this involves accumulating great merit. But without ethical discipline, the capacity, as Rinpoche said, to distinguish right action from wrong action, and without understanding the causes of suffering and the causes of happiness, this will not happen. End of story. Our energy, as well as our capacity to help others, will be seriously curtailed, even severed. Tsongkhapa makes precisely this point in the foundation of all qualities. I quote, "Just as we have fallen into the ocean of existence, all other beings, our very own past mothers, have too. Inspire us to see this and to master supreme bodhicitta, and to take responsibility for liberating all beings." inspire us to see that even if we develop the intention, unless we train in the 3 types of ethical discipline, we will not attain awakening. And thus we are to apply ourselves with great energy to upholding the Bodhisattva vows. So, without training in the 3 types of ethical discipline, we stymie and even squander the currently unbelievable, rare and brief flash of opportunity we currently have somehow achieved. From this perspective, even if our life is no more than from this perspective, even our current life, looking at the sort of entirety of this current life, is itself no more than a brief flash of lightning. I'm thinking cosmological terms here, across rebirths. This life is almost unimaginably difficult to measure in that vast expanse. So within this life as well, this opportunity to practice Dharma is similarly unbelievably small and is to be seized with great passion and energy now. Therefore, as Kabje Zopa Rinpoche indicates, as Shantideva indicates, as Lama Tsongkhapa indicates, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama indicates, the reality of our afflicted situation is such that if we do not seize the chance to practice now, we will be incapable of upholding ethical purity, and thus we will spoil our efforts or even ambition to uphold our Bodhisattva vows. And thus, and it's a big and thus achieve full awakening. So if we fail to uphold our Bodhisattva vows, the implications will flow way beyond ourselves. Therefore, Shantideva will further explore extensively in Chapter 5, Guarding Alertness, which has a special focus on withdrawing the mind from the lure of external objects by applying mindfulness and introspection. And I quote, "Those who wish to guard their practice should very attentively guard their minds, for those who do not guard their minds will be unable to guard their practice." So, returning to our current topic from last week's session, this is why we need to be exceedingly conscientious in order to prevent our activities of body, speech, and mind from falling under the sway and thus serving the reckless, compulsive purposes, the various damaging ambitions of the afflicted minds that have tyrannized us and other samsaric dwellers from beginningless time. Because if we don't take special care in this vigilant, careful way, not just sometime, but starting immediately, we risk not just deteriorating our bodhicitta mind, but even abandoning it utterly. How then to fulfill His Holiness's instructions to emulate the Guru's holy way of life? And how then to please the Holy Guru, who has appeared just like that flash of lightning from the radiant, empty expanse of the Dharmakaya in the marvelous form of a Rupakaya to instruct and guide us? I think this is what is indicated by His Holiness's metaphor of the Guru, and in this case, Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, being none other than, and I quote His Holiness, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge. I'll read that again. The Guru, the sole gateway through which all happiness and benefit emerge. So it is the sole gateway for us limited beings, because no other Buddha, no other Bodhisattva has, since immemorial time, been able, due to the density of our fog of ignorance, to appear to us in this palpable, illuminating, instructive, and healing way. This despite the fact that from the guru side, they have been spontaneously manifesting all of the time. Yet, just as such a gateway has miraculously opened, so can it equally unexpectedly close, slam shut even. The full context of His Holiness's potent gateway metaphor I'm quoting here is given in the second last verse of his recently composed Swift Return Prayer for Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, which I now quote that verse. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the victorious ones, teachings and mother sentient beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At that, I lost hope. It is to avoid losing hope and thus remain swamped in sadness and even self-pity that Shantideva is imploring us in chapter 4 to be vigilant and conscientious in utilizing our present circumstances in the most productive way imaginable, which is none other than maintaining purely our Bodhisattva pledges and commitments, because all virtues stem from there. So we'll now continue chapter 4, verse 2. And as we navigate this and the immediately following verses, we must keep in mind that the greatest loss here, we've dealt with loss. This would be the greatest loss. In fact, it's the greatest fault that we could possibly conceive of, which would be to spoil or surrender our Bodhisattva vows. For, as intimated at the end of the last session, to abandon our bodhicitta upon the basis of having already wholeheartedly embraced aspirational and engaging bodhicitta has negative consequences inversely equivalent to the immense beneficial consequences of maintaining that precious mind. Shantideva will not spare us or shield us from this fact. These are serious matters indeed. In other words, Shantideva is now setting out a sequence of pungent instructions designed to be hard-hitting because the stakes are so high. If we do manage to preserve our bodhicitta practice purely, continuously, increasingly, and without contradiction, deterioration, or gaps, it is truly wonderful. But if we don't, then we enter the realms of real loss and sadness. Thus, Shantideva starts out by laying compelling reasons why it is unsuitable to give up bodhicitta. This is immediately indicated by Gyaltsabje's heading to the second verse, explaining it extensively. So it's going to be laid out now. And the heading for verse 2 is the reason why it is unsuitable to give up bodhicitta. And the verse reads, in the case of reckless actions, or of deeds not well considered. Although a promise may have been made, it is fit to reconsider whether I should do them or not. That this verse is dealing with conscientiousness is made immediately clear in that it's presenting how a bodhisattva is to handle, or if you like, manage a case of reckless actions. The first two lines, in the case of reckless actions or of deeds not well considered. It is valuable here to consider that the Padmakara translation group translate conscientiousness as carefulness. According to this translation, His Holiness makes it clear that carefulness is the subject of the fourth chapter. And in our current context, carefulness or conscientiousness is to be understood as the antipathy, the polar opposite of the case of reckless actions or of deeds not well considered. His Holiness says, when we're referring to our deluded internal minds, substantial external enemies, we might even, if they were armed with missiles, have a little time with which to run away from them. But there is no escape and nowhere to hide from our internal enemies. As circumstances arise, all sorts of negative emotions, such as desire or anger, can suddenly spring up. There are numerous antidotes for these. The most important thing, though, is to apply carefulness, attentiveness, and mindfulness. We need to be always on our guard so that if a negative emotion or a thought arises or is about to arise, we're able to use these tools and to employ the antidote immediately at the very moment the mind is disturbed. When we practice in this way with carefulness, negative emotions become less and less powerful. End of quote. Thus, Shantideva is asserting that we must never waver from guarding our practice, as otherwise, how can we hope never to stray from it? On what basis will we possibly claim not to do so? We wouldn't even be aware of a problem of straying, that is. And on those occasions when we do recognize that we're straying or are about to, as His Holiness has just described, as in the case of eruptive, reckless actions, the arising of those internal enemies, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama puts it, we are to immediately stop and reconsider whether it is fit to continue as recklessly, thoughtlessly, carelessly planned. His Holiness advises in his commentary to this verse, it is a great mistake to be lax today, saying that we'll be more strict tomorrow. We should try to discipline our mind constantly so that we can become the good people we promised to be when we took the vow. This involves watching the mind constantly. I just wanted to mention here that Lama Tsongkhapa refers to this need to guard our vows by watching our mind constantly. He presents it through a very, very powerful analogy, like guarding our own eyes. And we all know, don't we, that when we're suddenly threatened with a violent physical attack one of the first things we do instinctively is to shield our face and particularly our eyes. It's that urgency, that crucial necessity that we feel at that moment that gives us some inkling of the powerful way in which this mind of conscientiousness should arise spontaneously, instinctively, to guard our vows, our bodhicitta mind at that time when it's threatened. In Lines of Experience, verse 16, and regarding the need to attain the perfection of ethical discipline, Tsongkhapa says, this is the source of that quote, ethical discipline is a water that washes away the stains of faulty actions. It is the ray of moonlight that cools the scorching heat of the defilements. It makes you radiant like Mount Meru in the midst of the 9 kinds of being. By its power, you are able to bend all things to your good influence without recourse to mesmerizing glares. Knowing this, the holy ones have safeguarded, as they would their eyes, the precepts that they have accepted to keep purely. This acceptance here is the form of the vow. We've actually taken it on in the form of an acceptance. We have accepted that we're going to live in this way. This is what is the most precious thing to protect and nurture. So Tsongkhapa says, knowing this, the holy ones have safeguarded as they would their eyes the precepts that they have accepted to keep purely. I, the yogi, have practiced this way. You who also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way. His Holiness glosses this passage of Tsongkhapa. He says, this verse refers principally to the practice of ethical discipline in the form of restraint. That is, restraining from negative actions, particularly in the context of the vows of individual liberation. For a Bodhisattva, the main practice of restraint is to refrain from self-centeredness and self-cherishing thoughts. So this refraining from negative actions and refraining from the self-centeredness and the self-cherishing thoughts that fuel them is what we're seeking to thoroughly achieve. Our notion of ethical practice must be expanded to encapsulate this. It is not just a matter of obeying some social, juridical order or imperative governmentally imposed from the outside. This is crucial to think about. You know, if you just sort of ask someone, well, what's ethical practice? What's ethical restraint? It's described in terms of a kind of a social structural discipline which we have to obey and serve, or in order to be an appropriate citizen. This Buddhist approach swings that ethical situation right around and places it within us at the very site of the arising of our various minds, and requires us to only give expression, if you like, to positive states of mind that are going to benefit self and others in a really genuine, conducive way, and to thwart and obstruct anything that's going to cause us to harm ourselves and others. And of course, this kind of harm can do immeasurable damage. And so we're all at the moment immersed in a world in which immeasurable damage is being done from the harm of the generations of thought within the minds of perhaps just a few individuals. I won't go into details because we can fill in those ourselves, but it just shows you the incredible capacity of an unguarded mind to cause immense harm and destruction in the world. So this is the epitome of that unguardedness, not being restrained. So in a drop from the ocean of mind and mental factors, in the translation by Fedor Strucker, which we can find under the Happy Monks website if you want to download that low-rig text, we find conscientiousness described as the opposite of recklessness, where one thinks it does not matter if my mind is under the control of the afflictions, which leads to all kinds of inappropriate actions. So there's a progression here from thought to action. Geltsabje, in his commentary on the Compendium of Knowledge, first quotes verse 56 of chapter 2 of Shantideva. Contemplating and strive in what has just been explained. To accomplish the trainings, there is no medicine that can cure if one does not listen to the advice of the physician. And then Geltsabje continues, contemplate in the above manner continuously, repeatedly. Make an effort to strive with conscientiousness in bodhicitta, in the way the Buddha explained it, and protect the trainings. There is no sickness that can be cured only with medicine, without listening to the instructions of the physician that contains many truths. Strive in abandoning the afflictions in accordance with the instructions of the great physician. Freedom from the memory of fault, freedom from the memory of faults, increasing virtue without degeneration. These depended certainly on meditation and conscientiousness. Hence, the proficient should always depend on conscientiousness. And Geshe-Doga likewise, at this point of his commentary to the second verse, says, without conscientiousness, it is said that one will not be able to engage in any of the three trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. This might seem like a straightforward statement, but it actually requires deep investigation. What is the relationship of morality to concentration? In other words, why would morality be a prerequisite for concentration? Why would morality be a prerequisite for wisdom? And for that matter, why would morality and concentrations be prerequisites for wisdom? So these are topics extensively explored and presented in the Lam Rim. So if we refer to the last two lines of verse 2, they read, although a promise has been made, it is fit to reconsider whether I should do them or not. And Geltsabje's commentary is very useful here. It says, actions that were just engaged in impulsively, without consideration of their benefits and drawbacks, or actions that were minimally analysed but were not well investigated before engaged in, are actions that are suitable to be investigated later on, to decide whether to continue them or not, despite having made an earlier commitment. I think we're dealing with psychology here, human psychology, because once we've committed to a thing, we know this, even a non-virtuous pathway, because we are so habituated to our commitment to doing something, we find it very hard to give it up. Even though if we stop to investigate, we realize it's an entirely inappropriate or unbeneficial action to perform. So it seems then that this reference in the verse to having made an earlier commitment refers to a commitment, a resolve, or even a promise to perform a non-virtuous act, such as killing or stealing or lying, etc. Perhaps we've already agreed to do this on behalf of someone else. That someone else might even be paying us to perform that action. And we might already be underway in planning to perform that action. Therefore, the timely, meaning immediate application of conscientiousness, remember the eye analogy, requires that we interrupt this non-virtuous trajectory and decide to withdraw from its continuation, circumvent it, in other words, even if this means we break our contract or our promise to either ourselves or a third party. If we feel we are to fulfill our contract no matter what, as the contract itself stands above all else, then we will have committed a very major conceptual mistake, and we will be poised to execute a major ethical blunder. So in other words, this ability to interrupt and then draw back mitigates the force of impulsiveness or recklessness that has been driving us seemingly uncontrollably towards non-virtuous actions. And it sometimes feels, doesn't it, that hauling back this inclination to perform that act is like dragging back a wild horse with very, very weak hands or arms. This is because we haven't habituated to restraining in this way. So our consequent decision or determination not to perform this non-virtuous action is due to the force of conscientiousness. I'm just thinking when it says a promise in the verse, we might have promised to our employee that we'll lie in order to protect their reputation. This happened to me once. Might seem like a trivial example, but it's kind of a good one. I was buying some large glass jars in which to put rice and lentils and so forth. And I was buying it from one of those very sophisticated home hardware stores where everything is very, very expensive and beautifully laid out on shelves. And I got the set of containers home and put them on my table. And as I did so, one of them just simply smashed to pieces just by the ordinary thing of putting it on a tabletop. And I returned it to get a replacement. And I explained what had happened. And the young shop worker began to say that, yes, I've been having lots of problems with those particular vases. But as she was doing so, her boss interjected and stopped her from continuing the explanation. So I just mentioned that. It seems like a trivial example, but it actually epitomizes the psychological scenario that we're talking about on a much more serious note if it becomes an issue of performing a serious non-virtue. So Geshe Doga, in relation to verse 2, therefore invites us to apply the message of this verse in a very pragmatic manner in terms of our daily lives. He says, so my advice, which is in line with what is being presented here, is don't be hasty making promises or commitments prior to investigating whether it is something suitable or manageable for you to do. You need to apply this advice in your everyday life situations. The main point, Gendoga continues, being presented here as that if normal activities need further investigation, then what need is there to mention further investigation of not giving up the mind of bodhicitta? This is explained further in the next verse. Verse 3, with a heading, why it is unsuitable to give up bodhicitta, the reason why. But how can I ever withdraw from what has been examined by the great wisdom of the Buddhas and their children, and even many times by me myself? The line, from what has been examined by the great wisdom, indicates sutras, such as the Array of Stalk Sutra, in which it is taught, as Gyaltsabje says, that bodhicitta is indispensable. Additionally, we're being asked in this verse to rely on investigation, using various lines of reasoning in order to determine unshakably why one should definitely take this mind of bodhicitta by thinking about its benefits and so on. Shantideva's point here is that it is not sufficient to superficially accept, for example, on hearsay, that bodhicitta is a precious mind. Rather, we have to examine ourselves why it is so. And what are the advantages of generating it within our continuum? We really have to examine why we must generate it within our continuum and what are the advantages. And moreover, what are the advantages of generating it in terms of others, the welfare of others? If in this way we have reached some understanding, then how could we think to give it up? If we've really recognized the advantages, to give it up would run against, or the mere thought of giving it up would run against everything that we have so carefully determined and decided. In other words, mere faith, no matter how strong, does not have this resilient capacity. Shantideva's verse here is very powerful logically. Who would throw away, especially recklessly or carelessly, the mind of bodhicitta? And here, of course, we have to recognize both the meaning and purpose of conventional and ultimate bodhicittas. The rhetorical line, but how can I ever withdraw from what has been examined by this great wisdom, is therefore an invitation to examine and also to accept on authority what has already been examined by the great wisdom, referring to the omniscient mind of the Buddha. So even if we can't see the certain qualities and capacities of bodhicitta or appreciate them all, of course, then we can rely on the fact that the Buddha has and can, because they are the perfected fulfillment of that very mind. So these hidden or obscure aspects, at least from the purview of our current limited perspective, can also be accepted because the omniscient mind is flawless. Not only does it comprehend everything, but it comprehends without error. I think Shantideva's lines also mean that we are invited to investigate and study the Bodhisattva vows prior to formally taking them, because this will assist us in maintaining our promise never to forsake them. it's entirely appropriate to proceed in this preparational way by researching the Bodhisattva vows. And this is different from the tantric vows, which are not meant to be read, let alone studied, until we have properly received a fully qualified initiation from a Vajra master, whether within the framework of yoga or highest yoga tantra, because both of those confer tantric vows. So Geshe Doga has also indicated that an intelligent student, so the stress is on intelligent there, an intelligent student will investigate the Bodhisattva vows in this way, whereas a student of lesser intelligence is prone to rely on faith alone. And Geshe Doga says they just accept and engage in the practices without too much investigation. So from this perspective, such a person will be more vulnerable to sudden, unexpected challenges, even to their faith. So I'm just going to be a bit sort of scurrilous here and suggest that if someone's relationship with their guru was based on a kind of feeling of affectionate faith and friendship, which of course it definitely is, then when something dramatic happens to that relationship, such as the guru ceasing to appear in a palpable form that we're able to hold on to nurture that sentimental attachment, then we are in real danger of giving up the great gifts that that guru has given us, because that sentimental base is going to be damaged and even dissolved by a traumatic change. This is the exact opposite of what we're trying to think here, that we're going to hold onto our Bodhisattva promise at the cost of our lives, no matter what, not just in this lifetime, but throughout every unfolding future lifetime. This is the point here. So Geshe Doga, of course, he's very, very pragmatic always. He goes on in his commentary to warn against excessive investigation. Doesn't go the other way, too far. What we mean here is that we might end up poring over books endlessly, trying to get the correct interpretation of what is meant by the Bodhisattva vows and the aspirational mind and engaging minds of enlightenment and so forth, and never get around to practicing. So we need to be skillful. But Shantideva is also intimating here a thoroughly dreadful prospect, one that might easily, certainly more easily arise if we haven't taken adequate efforts to examine as described. Namely, he's referring to giving up the mind of bodhicitta itself. And again, we must remember that this is referring to someone who is already has taken on aspiring and engaging vows. So to do this, to give up bodhicitta, breaks a key. In fact, we'd have to probably say the key bodhisattva vow, which is giving up bodhicitta. As Geshe Doga explains in his Bodhisattva vows commentary, in the context of this vow, we are mainly referring to aspirational bodhicitta. When we say that giving up bodhicitta is the cause of transgressing this bodhisattva root vow, we must understand that the actual moment of transgression takes place immediately after the moment of transgressing bodhicitta, i.e., is at that moment that bodhicitta has actually been abandoned. So we have the thought to abandon bodhicitta, and in the next moment, we have abandoned bodhicitta from then on. So Geshe-Doga says, we've already discussed how merely holding a wrong view, which is another one of the Bodhisattva vows, such as negating or denying the whole principle of the law of cause and effect, would affect a complete break of our Bodhisattva vows. It is the same here. So this is a really alarming thought. Simply thinking that one has given up the vow constitutes giving it up. At least that occurs in the next moment, but it is the base. And such a thought can occur in a flash, a burst of rage, a strong pang of unruly, passionate desire, a moment of stupidity. There need be no supplementary or restraining circumstances. This means we're dealing here with a very slippery slope. What we're to appreciate with this vow, along with the vow holding distorted views, is that it is unique within the set of the 18 Bodhisattva vows, in that it can be broken without the presence of all four binding factors being engaged. These binding factors are not regarding this act as detrimental, not forsaking the wish to repeat such a behavior, delighting and taking pleasure in it, and having no shame or consideration. So with the other vows, apart from wrong views, we need all four of those to be in play in order to create a root transgression. But in the case of giving up bodhicitta, we don't. And this really opens us to the potential to break this vow. So thus there's even more reason why we can so easily, carelessly give it up. As Geshe-Doga has just indicated, the mere wish, the mere thought to give up bodhicitta, just as the mere holding of a wrong view, will suffice. In reference to its source in the Compendium of Sutras by Shantideva, Tsongkhapa says, but once having relinquished the thought of awakening, one is a non-bodhisattva. The production of wrong views should be understood in the same way. In these cases, the very occurrence results in a seminal transgression. So we need not address the question of whether they have the shared factors of greater involvement, as we must and shall for the others. So greater involvement means all four of the binding factors are in play. Regarding the severity of this breakage, Shantideva says, hence bodhisattvas, in the presence of the Tathagatas, wishing to complete the training, correctly take up one of the many forms of training that is suitable for them. But if you don't have a spiritual teacher, you can visualize being in the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, and then take the vow through your own power. If you then don't keep it, you have broken your word to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and to the world with its gods. For the sutra on the application of mindfulness to the Holy Dharma says, someone who thinks about giving even a little bit and then doesn't give is reborn in the hells. What need even to speak of someone who has promised the highest benefit to all living beings without exception, and then does not actually keep that promise. In his training anthology, Shantideva unequivocally states that to violate this vow constitutes a lie. He quotes the Shantideva Sutra. Through these 10 wholesome courses of action, one becomes a Buddha. On the other hand, anyone who does not protect even one of these wholesome courses of actions for as long as he lives, but also claims, I'm a practitioner of the great way, I'll seek genuine full awakening, that person is a consummate rogue, a big liar, someone who lies in the presence of all the blessed ones, a materialist. He will die in ignorance, he will fall to the lower realms. Then Shantideva adds, now, as the Sutra on Chanting the Dharma says, noble sir, a bodhisattva should practice with devotion to truth. The recitation of the Dharma, noble sir, is the recitation of truth. What truth, noble sir? When a bodhisattva arouses his mind for highest, genuine, full awakening, and then does not abandon that intention, even for the sake of his life, and never does wrong to sentient beings, this is a bodhisattva's truth. But when a bodhisattva has aroused his mind for highest, genuine, full awakening, and later abandons that intention and does wrong to sentient beings, this, for that bodhisattva, is an abject lie. So we must appreciate here as well that in giving up bodhicitta, the 18th root vow, we relinquish in that instant the entire set of bodhisattva vows, just as we do when we perform a transgression in relation to any of the vows with the 4 binding factors engaged. So speaking more generally, Tsongkhapa delineates 2 causes for the relinquishment of this vow. The first cause, he says, is to generate a thought that is of lesser intention, vehicle intention. Moreover, it is to generate a thought that is certain in its dissimilarity to, that is to say, incongruent with, the thought of desire with which at the time you received the vow, you undertook to attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. It is a matter of relinquishing the aspirational thought. So the first one is that we think that we'll drop to a lower vehicle and give up the Bodhisattva path, because that, how can we be a Bodhisattva if we've done that? And secondly, we relinquish the aspirational thought. So Tsongkhapa says the second cause is to enunciate the formula of returning it for someone who understands the meaning and for the other to understand, so we can actually give it back. So this is the case of returning a pratamoksha vow, a vow of individual liberation. But Tsongkhapa says that in the case of returning the Bodhisattva vow, for ceasing to hold the vow after having promised to accomplish the benefit and pleasure of infinite sentient beings, you'll fall into a state of woe and wander there in circles for a very long time. For undermining the happiness of one single sentient being, you must go to a lower state of rebirth. If you undermine the happiness of the universe of sentient beings, the consequence is unspeakable. So Tsongkhapa in his explanation quotes Shantideva's 4th verse from chapter 4. If I've committed myself to it, and if I fail to do the work, I've deceived all those sentient beings. What will my destiny be? So following further supporting quotations, Tsongkhapa indicates that though these two causes of relinquishing the vow may appear to be very different, they nonetheless arrive at the same point. He says, the first cause for the relinquishment of the vow is to relinquish the aspirational thought. The second is not to relinquish the aspirational thought, but to relinquish the obligation to take up the burden of the Bodhisattva practice, meaning we don't bother to engage or work for others. You should only take the vow, says Tsongkhapa, after it has been well examined. And Tsongkhapa at this point quotes a Sangha. This is for the Bodhisattva, the gravest of transgressions. So you'll note here that Tsongkhapa is also recommending, just as Shantideva has just done in verse 3, that you should only take the vow after it's been well examined. So by way of summarizing the meaning of verses 2 and 3 together, Geshe Jumpa Tekchok says, as was said earlier, the Buddhas have checked up thoroughly for many eons what would be most useful for the migrators and have found it was bodhicitta. Similarly, before taking up bodhicitta, they first thought well over its benefits. We first had a little understanding that if bodhicitta is taken up, there are great benefits, that extensive, powerful actions can be carried out, and for that reason took it up. Having understood through checking over and over, seeing the benefits, knowing them, being aware, we took it up and committed ourselves. Therefore, we should not abandon the intention to attain enlightenment. We should make efforts in our mind to keep it firmly without degeneration until enlightenment. If we give up engaging, and this is crucial, if we give up engaging bodhicitta, we will have given up the wishing mind. And in that case, we will get the root downfall of abandoning bodhicitta. So you can see here that all the gurus, all the lamas are driving at the same point. But in particular, we've just noticed that Geshe Tekchok indicates that by giving up our engaging bodhicitta, we implicitly give up our aspirational bodhicitta as well. So the question is why? Because aspiring bodhicitta is the constitutional basis of engaging bodhicitta, without the foundation and initial aspiration, in other words, we would have no purpose or reason to engage. In saying that, we must be clear that the aspirational vow is not somehow superseded when we take engaging bodhicitta. This is what we mean when we say that aspirational vows, which in the overall evolution of bodhicitta, the mind of bodhicitta, are always taken first, is necessarily the foundation of the other. What I mean here is that aspirational bodhicitta is continuously present there as the basis for engaging. Therefore, we can see the deeper significance of Geshe Doga's statement quoted earlier, that in the context of the vow, giving up bodhicitta, we are mainly referring to aspirational bodhicitta. As just indicated, without the aspiration to become enlightened for the benefit of others, we would have no cause to engage, enter into practices that would perfectly accomplish that goal. And likewise, without engaging, our aspiration would have no means of fulfillment. It would remain necessarily just that, an aspiration. We would have the thought to become enlightened for others, but would not venture to do anything practically to bring that about. So when a bodhisattva who is on the bodhisattva path and is thus necessarily engaging gives up bodhicitta, this means they are also giving up the aspiration, because without engaging, there would be no means of accomplishing the aspiration. And they would also be giving up the bodhisattva path, as this can't be separated in any way from the mind of bodhicitta itself. In fact, the mind of bodhicitta is the path. So again, you can see here that we're not just talking about someone who has just taken or merely wishes to take the aspirational vow alone. They can't fall down from engaging because they have not yet ceremonially committed to engaging. Thus, they can't, technically speaking, give up bodhicitta in the sense being discussed here. This is because they don't actually yet hold the set of bodhisattva vows, including the key one in this discussion, giving up bodhicitta. And importantly, this means that they are also not subject to the grievous consequences now laid out by Shantideva, because Shantideva hasn't finished yet. So I just want to mention that in relation to His Holiness's presentation of giving the aspirational vow in a flash of lightning, where he gives that alone. It's very interesting there that His Holiness in that commentary leaves out these verses completely and jumps quite some way ahead. So I think that's because it's sort of not necessary to discuss these matters in that circumstance. But I think from our circumstance, we need to seriously investigate. So having outlined this issue in some detail and with some seriousness as wanted by the seriousness of the subject matter, we're now better positioned to grasp the manner in which Shantideva vigorously and closely pursues this investigation, starting with the very next verse, the one that Tsongkhapa just quoted, or was in that quote. The reason for going to the lower realms. Verse 4, if having made such a promise, I do not put it into action, then by deceiving every living being, what kind of rebirth shall I take? So having made the promise to place all sentient beings in the state of enlightenment, if one does not then practice the path to achieve this aim, then one will have deceived all sentient beings. How then can one become, as a migrator, someone who does not go beyond the lower realms? So another word for deceit here would be lie. And considered as a lie, it is vast. Geshe Jumpa Tekchok says, previously, when we generated the mind of enlightenment, we made a promise to place all sentient beings in the state of happiness as human beings and gods temporarily, and in the state of omniscient mind ultimately. Therefore, if we do not put our actions of body, speech, and mind into accomplishing our promise, which is, of course, a reference to engaging, we have told a great big lie to all sentient beings. So in the next verse, Gyaltsabje places them under a heading stating supporting evidence. Verse 5 reads, if it has been taught by the Buddhas that those who do not give away the smallest things which they once intended to give, will take rebirth as hungry ghosts, then if I should deceive all beings after having sincerely invited them to the unsurpassable bliss, shall I take a happy rebirth? So the logic here involves exponential operations. If not giving away the smallest item that one intended to give gives results, as the Buddha taught, of being reborn as a hungry ghost, then what are the karmic consequences of not giving unsurpassable bliss unto all sentient beings as promised? We're not just promising to give them a cake or a piece of chocolate. We promise them unsurpassable bliss, and not just to one person, but to all sentient beings. So a lower rebirth, meaning an unhappy rebirth, is sure to occur, as the karmic inverse of the happiness in upper realms, liberation and enlightenment, was exactly what we promised to others. So a hungry ghost rebirth here is just an example, but a poignant one, as in effect we have deprived or starved other sentient beings of the unsurpassable bliss that we promise to give by dint of taking the Bodhisattva vows. Thus, we suffer intolerable hunger and want of living and vital resources as a consequence, or it might be a hell rebirth. Geshe Jumpa Tekchok outlines the gravity of the situation. Quote, "In those examples, we were talking about deciding and promising to give something to benefit others a little. In this case, however, we have said we would set up sentient beings ultimately in the state of greatest benefit and happiness, which is that of peerless enlightenment, and in the happiness of high status until that state is gained for the time being. We've accepted and given our word in front of the gurus and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, whom we called upon to bear witness to our promise with their direct knowledge. If we do not subsequently work at the method for that, we will surely go to the hell realms. It is very wrong." Geshe Doga observes further that our change of heart is even rendered even more acutely a lie because we made our pledge at the time of taking the Bodhisattva vows with a loud, clear voice. We actually asked the Buddhas to pay witness to us taking the vows, and we had to repeat that resolution with a loud, clear voice so that all the holy beings could hear and witness and accept that promise. So that is what we're breaking. So you can see here just to be sort of very serious stuff, isn't it? But to swing it around again, which we constantly must, just imagine what it would mean for our relationship to the Buddhas and the holy gurus if we could maintain our Bodhisattva vows. How extraordinarily pleased those beings would be, because they would recognize that we are securely on the path and are going to be consequently able to benefit countless sentient beings in the future. Nothing will make them more happy, and there'll be no greater karmic cause for our continued close relationship and guidance with our precious teachers. So again, this is what was behind, I can't say what's behind His Holiness's intention because that's sort of pretentious, but my feeling is that this is what His Holiness means when he says that we must seek to emulate our precious Khyentse Zopa Rinpoche by living the Guru's way, which is the way of the Bodhisattva. So the next verse, 7, is refuting objections. And in another of the translations of Gyalp Sabje's outline, it's referred to as dismissing a contradiction. Only the omniscient can discern the manner of the action of those who give up the awakening mind, but are freed. It is beyond the scope of ordinary thought. So the objection here is answering a query that might arise in relation to the last verse. So the reference is particularly to Arya Shariputra, one of Buddha's chief disciples. I'm going to use Kunsang Pelden's account here. The point of view that only failure must be in store for him who gives up the awakening thought seems to be contradicted by the story of Shariputra, as recounted in the Pundarika Sutra. He generated the enlightened attitude, venerated 10,000 Buddhas, and worked for the benefit of sentient beings. But in the course of his life as King Vinashiva, he was approached by a malevolent demon who, appearing in the form of a Brahmin, asked for his right hand. The king, the earlier incarnation of Shariputra, cut off his right hand and presented it to the demon appearing as a Brahmin with his left. And the demon at that moment cried out, "I will not accept an offering presented with such disrespect." And at that moment, Shariputra was downcast and forsook his bodhicitta. He obtained liberation nonetheless, and having become an arhat, worked for the welfare of beings. However, there is no contradiction here. Why not, you ask? Kunsang Pelden ventures an answer in line with Shantideva's next verse, verse 7, which we've just read. Only the omniscient can discern the manner of the action. Kunsang Pelden says, when those on losing their bodhicitta do not fall into the lower realms, but on the contrary attain liberation and even lead others to deliverance, it is due to the karma they have previously accumulated. The workings of karma in all its different forms are indeed beyond the conception of ordinary minds. As it is said, for a single iridescent eye upon a peacock's tail, the causes are many and distinct. One who knows them is indeed all-knowing. Without all-knowing wisdom, they cannot be known. And regarding the same noteworthy, because famous exception, Gyaltsabje says, answer, when Shariputra, or anyone else for that matter, attains arhatship despite having abandoned bodhicitta, then that is a karma that is beyond the knowledge of ordinary beings and can only be understood by an all-knowing Buddha. It cannot be understood by anybody else. There are other theories put forward on this issue. One is that Shariputra relinquished the cultivation of conventional Bodhi mind, but not ultimate Bodhi mind. Hence, he could still achieve liberation. And there's a variation of this. Although Shariputra stopped cultivating bodhicitta, he did not relinquish his intention to achieve liberation. He was consequently not at fault. He attained liberation, and on that basis did not fail to liberate others. Geshe Doga, likewise in his commentary, presents both of these alternative theories and concludes that both explanations are valid and in accordance with Gyaltsabje's account, and thus bear profound meaning. So I'll leave these matters for your own further investigation. But I think, of course, the very obvious point is that we cannot assume that we will fall into this exceptional category, such as Shariputra's and thus we cannot trade lightly with giving up our vow. The grim fact is that we are not omniscient Buddhas, and so we can't possibly have any actual idea of what we would be doing or what pre-established karmic imprints might be present to fall back upon if we were in fact to give up our bodhicitta mind. So we're returned face to face with the force of Shantideva's presentation. It is perilous to abandon our bodhicitta mind, even for a split second, and even for the merest reason. So it just might be helpful here to mention that Kunzang Pelden indicates 3 ways in which you might give up a bodhisattva vow. In the first place, if the occasion to help someone, even a mortal enemy, arises and one decides not to do so, or if, when there is a chance to save sentient beings from harm, one has no thought of doing so, one is, in effect, turning away from them. Just sort of interject here, this, of course, requires great investigation, doesn't it? Because it means that if we abandon the welfare of one person in our heart, we don't care less, we're careless, we don't care less whether or not they suffer. We have broken our bodhicitta vow. The second reason is bodhicitta is also lost after entering the Mahayana when one engenders the Hinayana attitude, as Tsongkhapa meant. This isn't a critique of the Hinayana attitude here. It's very much to do with the perspective of a bodhisattva. And finally, bodhicitta is abandoned when any of the 4 faults occur. Any of the root downfalls are transgressed. We might add here that this is because when a root downfall of our bodhicitta vows occurs, the entire set of vows is lost. This means it would invariably lose the promise to maintain bodhicitta along with the loss of our other vows. So these are all matters of further investigation. So in this case, we haven't deliberately set out to abandon our mind of bodhicitta, but it is abandoned when we break one of our other vows in effect, with the 4 binding factors intact, a root vow. So these are matters for investigation. Tsongkhapa's mention of 2 main factors did not include the third. And I think that's because it's a corollary of breaking any of the root vows, and thus is a general condition for breaking the entire set. So you recall that Tsongkhapa gave the causes for relinquishment as follows. The first cause for the relinquishment is to relinquish the aspirational thought. The second is not to relinquish the aspirational thought, but to relinquish the obligation to take up the burden of the bodhisattva practice. So there are many things to think about there. But my thought is that perhaps in the case of breaking any of the vows, and therefore losing our set of vows, we are not necessarily acting with a deliberate intent or thought to give up our bodhisattva vow. So, for example, we might commit a fault of praising oneself and belittling others with great power, with the 4 binding factors intact. So I think maybe the karmic gravity of that way of losing our bodhisattva vow is significant, in significant ways different to the actual thought of relinquishing the bodhisattva vow itself. And that's why Tsongkhapa doesn't give that third explanation that Kunzang Pelden gives. So the 8th verse, one will degenerate from the welfare of others. So this is the crunch. One will not only fall down from one's own bodhicitta resolve, but one will fall down from our promise to work for the welfare of others. This has dire consequences, not just for ourselves, but for those others. So this is why it's much more serious than falling down from one's own resolve personally, because it concerns and affects others directly. Shantideva says, verse 8, this for a bodhisattva is the heaviest of downfalls, for should it ever happen, the welfare of all will be weakened. So the statement, for should it ever happen, the welfare of all will be weakened, is to be interpreted as such. We have rescinded our promise to support and assist the happiness of all sentient beings. Therefore, to this same vast extent, the benefits that not just one, but all sentient beings were to have otherwise received has now also been withdrawn or collapsed. This is the meaning of universally weakened. In other words, upholding the bodhicitta mind is the most extraordinarily positive thing we could possibly do, because it has the potential to benefit everybody. Likewise, repudiating it, forsaking it, abandoning it, such as thinking, for example, it is simply too difficult, too burdensome to hold or maintain, as Tsongkhapa describes, and hence settling for a lesser aim, such as a goal of mere liberation for oneself, is to effectively deny sentient beings access to this measurement of benefit that was being offered. As Kunsang Pelden says, it casts down a bodhisattva's capacity to accomplish the good of all beings. The welfare of all beings is consequently cast down. If, on the other hand, Buddhahood is achieved, the benefit of all beings who fill the whole of space is accomplished on a vast scale. And as Geshe Doga indicates, Gyaltsabje further explains that it harms the welfare of all sentient beings because the basis of practice, which is bodhicitta, degenerates. When bodhicitta degenerates, then the very basis for the practices of the six perfections, which are the means to bring about the welfare of sentient beings, is harmed, and hence the welfare of all sentient beings is harmed. So I might stop there, and I was very conscious of the weight of today's presentation, but it really is necessary to look at, I think, with open eyes. And it's also, I think, a very powerful way of delineating with absolute vividness what it does mean to hold the mind of bodhicitta. And so my sort of humble feeling is that because holding that mind is so extraordinarily beneficial and extraordinarily good, I'm speaking sort of, the open eye here, I must definitely proceed to practice and engage, even if at some time I run into tricky or disastrous circumstances. That is not the slightest bit important, because I'm going to return and continue my path despite the hitch. So just sort of word of comfort too, it is possible to retake your bodhicitta vows, and therefore you can also restore them if they're lesser breakages through Vajrasattva and so forth, purification practice. But in the case of a root downfall, it's necessary to formally take the set of vows again. But that can happen. And there are many opportunities of taking our vows. And that's why we should gravitate to those opportunities whenever we can. And this is one of the reasons why many of the Buddhist practitioners do regular self-initiation practices in relation to their deity yoga practices, because within those practices we retake, or we actually retake, because we've already taken the sets of Bodhisattva and Tantric vows, and in this way we purify and restore any transgressions. So we keep working forward. So in relation to next week, it's going to be our last formal session, and it's clear that we haven't got to the end of the text. And I think that's okay, but I'm going to present some verses in the first half of the session, and then I'm going to devote some time to discussing the exam. But I don't see that as an onerous sort of activity at all, because there are so many incredibly precious resources to draw upon. And in the exam, I'm going to be pointing towards particular verses requiring particular interpretation, and sometimes looking at the linkages between verses and the linkages between chapters. And all of these matters are extensively presented in the various commentaries we have. So I think all I'm hopefully have managed to do is to throw open the door to further investigation of these topics. So are there any questions or comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, I have.
Thanks, Kato.
I just wanted to say how deeply, deeply, deeply touched I am by this class and your teaching and your delicate, beautiful, unbelievable explanations. I know they're commentaries, but they're coming through you. And the way you present it, it goes into my cells. And I need this. I need this, and I'm so thankful. So
Well, thank you so much for your very kind words.
Yeah.
What I've actually already prepared a next session. Even if I don't do anything else, I'm going to present Lama Tsongkhapa's praises to Shantideva as inspiration for what we've done together. And I'm then going to turn Rinpoche's own words of praises back to describe Rinpoche, because that's something that Rinpoche himself would never do. He would never compare himself to Shantideva. But it seems to me that Shantideva and Lama Tsongkhapa and His Holiness, of course, and so forth, are one. And that's very, very inspiring to think about. And it's that continuity through our own practice that I've been attempting to emphasize today, because that is the crucial point, isn't it? So I think if we can take the hard case, giving up our bodhicitta, but the lesser case is that we're not practicing bodhicitta with enough energy or enough force, or attempting to engage. We're sort of doing it, but we're not really doing it. We haven't given up, but we haven't really applied ourselves. And so the sudden disappearance to our perception of Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, and we think, oh, there's this gap. There isn't a gap at all, because it's here. Our practice is here. And that's why when that story about Nepal and the student going to Rinpoche with the Nepalese earthquake, they were expecting to get some special practice. But Rinpoche wasn't going to do that one. He said, Tonlen. And he added to that, if you're not going to practice Tonlen now, when? The perfect circumstance. And so what I'm trying to do in my own little way is whenever I'm feeling some sort of anxiety or deep sadness, which is there because of Rinpoche's what's happened, I attempt to think of others and think how lucky I am to have had those teachings and so forth, and then to perform on Len to create the conditions for the welfare of others and move in that way. So there's a continuity there. So I think we'll stop at that point. And if you do have any questions about the exam, do clarify them so that they can be presented or, are shared with us as a group. But as I said, I don't think there's going to be any problem. It's going to be an open exam, which means you'll have time and space to prepare your answers. And I'm very open to formal technical answers as well as experiential sort of emotional answers as well. They're both very valuable ways of answering questions, not one at the expense of the other, but you've got that flexibility as well. So some of the questions will be deliberately asking you to apply the teachings to your own understanding of your own practice. So in that way, you'll be able to speak very, very personally as well. So I really respect any sharing of ideas at that moment. So thank you very much. And I'll ask Lou to lead the prayers. Thank you.
Dedication prayers. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide, dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy be materially supported and honored, and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine actions spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In a land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until psychic existence is ended. A prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Patayaka Buddhas, victorious Lozang, father and sons, together with your lineage, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparably venerable Guru, to you I make request. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the victorious one's teachings and mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At this I lost hope. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels and the great waves of the mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. A lamenting wail a supplication for the swift return of the Supreme Lord of Refuge, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Guru, think of me. Guru, consider me. Gracious Guru, care for me. Root Guru, most gracious and kind, do not deprive us of your compassionate refuge. Listen and consider this heartfelt prayer made by a tormented disciple. Guru, you embody the blessings of the Buddhas of the 3 times. You may rest in great bliss, equiposed with the dhatu of unimpeded luminosity, yet the playful dance of your loving compassion can emanate in myriad ways. The swift appearance of your magical wisdom, the Rupakaya, the time has come for you to care for us once again with your affectionate compassion. I invoke you, I call upon you, I implore you on behalf of all beings. Arise, arise, arise from the Dhammakaya. Do not rest in Kakara or other pure celestial realms. Rather, to benefit the Buddha's teachings and all living beings, swiftly return to the southern continent to spread the Buddha Dhamma of study and realizations. Quickly return to guide us poor, wretched beings. Such is the desperate cry of us, your disciples. Return so that we may actually behold your presence and receive the blessings of your enlightened body, speech, and mind. All violations, errors, mistakes, and broken samaya that we have made in relation to your spontaneously present, awakened body, speech, mind, and activity, through our being baffled, confused, and conceiving things in erroneous ways, we confess within the luminous emptiness of your 3 kayas. Of everything auspicious, the supreme auspiciousness, may there be the auspiciousness of emptiness and compassion conjoined, and the auspiciousness of timely meeting between master and disciples. Through the force of the truth of unchanging suchness, may the unmistaken incarnation return quickly. This lament was made by me, a Dakini with pure faith and samaya, her eyes filled with tears of sorrow. May these wishes of a beggar woman be fulfilled through the blessings of the deities of the 3 roots. Perception, its object in the act of perceiving all dissolved within the expanse, the blissless clarity of suchness. Tenzin Osul Hita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West. Mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Geshe Lobsang Doga, you with an immutable vow to spread to the limits of space the Dharma of the Able One in general, and the Dharma of the pure-minded conqueror, supreme, superior spiritual friend of unrepayable kindness, please remain for hundreds of eons and bestow the supreme and common siddhis. Geshe Tupten Sherab, beloved teacher leading your students toward wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path. You are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life. Chom dan da dejan shake padra chom payan, dak pad zog pe sangye nam pa nang, za o ki gyal pola shag shalo, jangchub sempa sempa chenpo kuntu zangpo, la shag shalo, tayata panchagriya awa bodani swaha, om duru duru jayamukhi swaha, tayata panchagriya awa bodani swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayata Panchagriya, Arabodani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayata Panchagriya, Arabodani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayata Panchagriya, Arabodani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayata Panchagriya, Arabodani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayata Panchagriya, Arabodani Swaha, Om Duru Duru, Jayamukhi Swaha. Due to the power of the blessings of the eminent Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the power of infallible dependent rising, and the power of my pure special attitude, may all my pure prayers succeed immediately.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ross.
Thank you, everyone.